Hello! In this module, we are going to continue our discussion of epistemology, that is to say, of the theory of knowledge. We'll be looking at the rest of the meditations of Descartes, and also a little bit at the views of the philosopher John Locke. So let's get going. Let's remember that Descartes is lived in the early 1600s, first half of the 1600s, and he's a big proponent of science, the scientific revolution. He writes his meditations in order to make room for the new science, physics, astronomy, the discovery that the Earth is not the center of the universe and that the Earth orbits the sun, and all sorts of Galileo and Copernicus and all of that, the beginning of physics and astronomy of a certain sort, and so on. So in Meditation 1, he's trying to clear the ground for that new science, to brush away old views. And so at the end of Meditation 1, he looks like he's concluded that we should be skeptics about the physical world. That is to say, we should not believe that there is a physical world. We shouldn't deny that there's a physical world, maybe. We certainly can't be certain of that, but we should not believe that there's a physical world. Well, that's not quite what he says at the end of Meditation 1. He says we should be skeptics about the physical world if all of our opinions come from the senses. If all of our reason to think that there's a physical world is just the sensory perceptions that we have of the physical world. And in fact, Descartes, in the rest of the meditations, is going to say, actually, we can know geometry and arithmetic, and we can know physics, and we can just know simple facts about the physical world, like I'm sitting in front of a fire, or I'm watching a video, or whatever. And we use our sensory perception to do that, but sensory perception alone is not sufficient to provide us knowledge. We also need the support of reason, of our ability to think and to understand ideas. And once we have that support, then actually we can rely on our senses, but we need that support. The senses are not self-standing or self-certifying. They can't do it on their own. We're briefly at the end of this module going to look at the views of a philosopher, John Locke, who disagrees with Descartes on these views, who thinks that reason by itself provides little or no knowledge, and that in fact the senses alone can provide that knowledge of the physical world. And along the way we're going to see that we're not going to see Locke argue this, but Locke also thinks there's no such thing as innate ideas. What are those? We're going to find out as we proceed in our discussion of Descartes. So what did Descartes claim in Meditation 1? What he says is that the senses alone cannot tell whether sensory experiences are either accurate or instead produced by an evil deceiver. There's nothing that the senses alone can do to tell us what produced the sensory experiences that we have, thinks Descartes. And so he gives this argument for his conclusion: I should withdraw all of my opinions, in particular about the existence of a physical world. Whatever I have up till now accepted as most true, I've acquired either from the senses or through the senses. Nothing from the senses is completely certain and indubitable. Everything from the senses is at least somewhat uncertain and somewhat doubtable. And I should assent only to opinions which are completely certain. Well, if all three of those are true, then in fact I should withdraw all of my opinions. Descartes, that's the argument Descartes presents, but we're going to see as we continue the discussion of the meditations that in fact he doesn't believe most of the premises of this argument. He doesn't believe that whatever he's up till now accepted as most true is from the senses. He might have thought that, but he was wrong. Actually, there's stuff that he's accepted as most true that has come from reason. And it's going to turn out that in fact some things from the senses are completely certain and indubitable, but the only way you can tell that is by using reason. So we're going to see why Descartes thinks that and rejects those first two premises as we proceed. So let's get into it. We're going to be focused mostly on Meditation 2, which is the further part of the meditations that you're asked to read for this unit. In Meditation 2, Descartes presents what elsewhere he summarizes as using this phrase cogito ergo sum, which you may have heard. It means, it's in Latin, Descartes was writing in Latin, it means I think, therefore I am. It's not actually an argument, but Descartes says, well, at the end of Meditation 1, he says, I'm imagining that I'm being deceived in every possible way by an evil demon. Well, what could that demon deceive me about, and what could that demon not deceive me about? And Descartes says, well, wait a minute. The demon can't deceive me about my existence. It can't deceive me about whether or not I'm thinking. It can't deceive me about whether or not I'm wondering whether or not I'm deceived by an evil genius. There's no way the evil genius could do any of those things. If I think those things, then they're true. And so the demon cannot deceive me about them. when I have a sensory perception, we can imagine, well, where did the sensory perception come from? Was it produced by some external object, physical object that it in some way resembles, perhaps, or was it instead produced by an evil genius? Well, not certain. But with these, Descartes thinks, no, there's no way that I could be brought about, I could think those things and yet them be false. If I'm thinking these things like I exist, or I think, or I wonder in these ways, then they are true, just thereby. By the very act of their occurring in my mind, they have to be true. So those are things I cannot be deceived about. And so the evil genius can't deceive me about everything. These ideas have some ties back to things we've been talking about earlier. If you remember, we were talking about personal identity, there is the idea that maybe you're just a psychological process, you're not a being, you're just a process, and there are all these different experiences rolling along, but there's nothing more than the experiences. And Descartes thinks, no, that's not true. When I sort of consider myself, I know that I'm something more than the experiences. I'm the subject of them, the thing that's experiencing them, and I'm the agent of some of them. I'm the one that makes some of them happen. I'm the one that directs my attention, that judges, that I am being deceived or not being deceived and so on. I'm the one that produces some of these states. And so in that way, Descartes is disagreeing with some of the earlier view on personal identity we looked at. This meditation also has some connection with the merry thought experiment, if we recall that, because in this thought experiment, one thing we notice is that, you have special knowledge about what it's like to see red when you have the experience. There's a special way you can get special kind of knowledge you can have of your very own mental states that you acquire by having them. And this is what Descartes is pointing at, that I have special knowledge of my own mental states. I can know, for example, what am I wondering? I'm wondering that I'm being deceived by an evil demon, and that somehow that knowing what I'm thinking, I can't be mistaken about that in at least some ways, Descartes thinks. So this second meditation has had a lot of philosophical influence since Descartes first wrote it. Okay, so Descartes thinks I can know that I exist, I can know that I think, I can know that I wonder whether I'm just deceived by an evil genius. An evil genius cannot confuse me about these subjects. And Descartes notes that, well, look, when I know these things, I'm not relying on sensory perception, right? I don't need to wonder whether or not my sight or my touch or my taste or my hearing or my smell is accurate. I don't need to worry about those organs. I don't need to worry about where those different sensory perceptions are coming from. I know these independently of, and in a certain sense, before sensory perception. They're known prior to sensory perception, and so this sort of knowledge of these kinds of things that I can know without sensory perception, this is called a priori knowledge, because it's in a certain sense prior to or before sensory perception. And so we see now why Descartes is going to reject the first premise of the argument. Descartes has believed for a long time that he exists. He's believed for a long time that he thinks, and he has at various times in the past had various knowledge of what he was thinking in particular ways. I was thinking, I would like some breakfast, whatever it was. And all of that knowledge, Descartes thinks, actually didn't come from the senses. And so that first premise of the argument is now false. And so it's not true that at least we don't have an argument anymore, that I should withdraw all of my opinions. However, this argument might look kind of limited because, okay, sure, maybe there's some things I can know, like I exist and I think, and I'm thinking about philosophy right now, and at other times I'm thinking about my car or whatever it might be. But that's pretty limited because it's just knowledge of what my thoughts are. It's not knowledge, say, of my car or, how it needs new shocks or whatever. It's just knowledge of what I'm thinking about. And so while Descartes may have convincingly given us evidence that this first premise is wrong, we still have pretty limited knowledge so far. And so Descartes' project hasn't gotten us that far. He wants to get us to the point where, yes, we have knowledge of the physical world, but he's not anywhere near there yet. So, in the next videos, we're going to see how Descartes tries to get from this foundation of, I know that I exist, all the way out to, I can have certain knowledge of the physical world. And in order to understand how Descartes is going to get us to the point where he thinks he has explained how we have certain knowledge of the physical world, we're going to need to also explore this idea of a priori knowledge a little bit more. And that's what we'll get into in the next videos.